For those of you all that are visiting with us, we are going through our theme this year, which is Love Outpoured. And as we do our lessons and whatnot, it's going to be about showing how we can outpour our love for our community and how Christ has outpoured his love for us. And the board that you have up here, we made a commitment at the beginning of the year that there would be a group of us that would commit to pouring out this love into someone in our community that is lost, and that we would take the time to pray for them, reach out to them, and try to share the gospel with them. So each one of those lights up there actually represents somebody in this group who's praying and working with somebody in our community. And we do that for a special reason. We do that because Christ did such an outpouring of love for us that we can't help but do that and share that with someone else. So as we talk this morning, I want to keep that in mind as we go through a small portion in time of Christ's life, as we begin to look into the closing moments, the closing days of Christ's life as we are coming close to Easter and working on that. I don't know if you are aware or not, but there was an election held in the Soviet Union in Russia this week. And it was a really close one. You all laugh and jest, right? They were interviewing one of the guys who is running against Putin this last week. And as they were interviewing, they said, well, what are some of the differences? What do you think that you could improve on and on what Putin's doing? He said, well, Putin's a good man, and he's doing really good programs. And I would be honored to serve underneath him. But I thought you were running for president. Oh, yeah, I am. And there's this initial fear here of if I say the wrong thing or I miscategorize someone in this kind of power that I may not be here much longer. And this idea of if you're able to speak truth or not. I don't know about you, but one of the hardest things for me to do is to stand and listen to somebody not speaking truth. It's hard for me. It's really hard for me not to correct things that are not being done right. It's even harder for me if somebody's going to say something that's not true about me. This is the most hard thing, I think, for any of us. Maybe you've been there before. You've been at work and your boss is making a comment about something that he says that you have done to some of your superiors, but you know that you haven't done it. And you want to say something, but if you do, there's going to be repercussions. Or maybe for some of you kids, maybe your parents, I know this has never happened before, could have been wrong. And they may have accused you of making a mistake or of doing something. Maybe they said, you left out the milk, or you didn't do your chore when you did. And you have that moment where you can either argue with them or you can stand there and take it. I can tell you now, my kids don't stand there and take it. It is straight up argument time. And I'll say there are times when you just need to be silent. And that is the worst. And as we look into today, as we go into our scriptures, we are going to look into a smidgen of the different gospels, but we're going to look into this moment in time. Whenever Jesus has things being said about him that just aren't true. He has things that are being said about him that are not justified. And the ramifications of letting those things stand are enormous. And he's got to make a decision on what he's going to do. A couple weeks ago, we read Isaiah 53, and I want to jump in on verse 7, because this is where we're going to be heading in and working with today. In Isaiah's prophecies, one of the things he prophesied was this: he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. As a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And as we look this morning in the life of Christ, I want us to go back and start here. We've seen this painting a thousand times, and it triggers us to think the Lord's Supper. We've just taken communion that was based off of this dinner. And we know at this time, these are the last days before Christ's death. This is the last meal that he will eat. And as he has this meal with his friends, he lays forward some things that are going to happen. He predicts his death once again. He predicts who's going to deny him and who's going to persecute him. And he finishes up his dinner, and he goes about 120 yards out to a garden area, out to the mountain. And he begins to pray, and as he prays, he has this intense moment of prayer, and we know from the stories that as he's praying to God to take this cup from me. I don't want to have to go through the sacrifice that's going to have to happen. And a lot of times when we hear that, we think about the cross. We think about the pain of the cross, but it was so much more than that. Because there's something that intensely happened that I want to talk about today that happened way before the cross. Because as he's praying and he gets done praying, Judas brings a group of people up to be able to capture him, and Jesus is brought in. In the middle of the night, he is grabbed by soldiers and he's taken to Annas. And in this moment of time, within a 6-hour period, he goes through 6 trials. I want you to think about that. We believe in our court system that you are innocent until proven guilty. We believe that everyone has the ability to defend themselves. Everybody has the right to be able to set things straight. And in the middle of the night, he is grabbed and he is captured and drug off. He doesn't fight it. He doesn't try to cause problems with it. He just goes. And we're going to see 6 trials in 6 hours. And the first is before Annas. He's the former high priest. And what's happened here is that Rome has taken him off his leadership role. And so he's put his son Caiaphas in to be the high priest. But everybody in the Jewish community knows who really is running the show. And it's him. And so when we begin the scriptures in John, you'll notice that Jesus is not taken to Caiaphas. He goes here instead. In John 13:40 it says, and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. And Caiaphas was the one that had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good for Jesus to die. And what's happened here, if you don't realize it, is that they have actually brought him in there to determine if what Caiaphas has said is legitimate. Should Jesus really die? Do we have the right to kill Jesus? We're not going to go to the high priest. We're going to go to the one who's really the high priest and ask him first. Now, the thing about that is that according to Jewish customs, according to Roman law, it is illegal to take somebody and put them into a court setting in the evening. It is against the law. And yet here for his first trial, he goes before Annas and is brought in illegally and charged. And the scriptures tell us that he is brought then before Caiaphas. And Caiaphas decides that he will charge him with blasphemy. And this is also whenever Peter denies him. And I want to show you what it says in the scriptures. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave the false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy the temple made in human hands and build it in 3 days with another, not made with hands. Yet even then, their testimony did not agree. And Jesus is literally standing there and listening to people say bad things about him, saying all these horrible things and trying to find a way to destroy him. And the Jesus that is outpouring his love right now is outpouring his love for you and I, because he is literally taking these words, these things that had to have been boiling in his blood, hearing them trying to say one false testimony after another. And they were so absurd and so crazy that they don't even agree with each other. And they're looking in there and they can't find anything that's going to fit. But Caiaphas desperately wants him to be gone. Then the high priest stood up before them and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer what this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Jesus had every opportunity to correct things. He had every opportunity to let people know what was truth. But instead, he stood there calmly and humbly and let them say the words that they were going to say. And Caiaphas questions him again and said, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And to this, Jesus can't stand silent anymore. And he says, "Yes, I am. Yes, I am." He let them say all kinds of other things about him. But when asked directly, "Are you the Son of God?" he said, "Yes. Yes, I am." Of all the times that he could have stood silent, this could have been the moment. Because if he stands silent right here, if he says nothing right here, then there's nothing that they can do. But he never denies who he is. He says, and Caiaphas says, "Why do we need any more witnesses? I have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" And again, in the middle of the night, ironically in the same house, because Annas and Caiaphas were in the same house, he's now been brought to trial a second time and condemned. So now they've got to make it done correctly. Because now, for the first two times in trial, he's been done at night. And that's not legal. Even though they've already determined what's going to happen to him, they already know that they plan to kill him, they have to make it legal. So now at daybreak, in Mark it says, very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him to Pilate. And so for the third time, they brought him before everyone. They said, "This is your judgment. We now are going to turn you in and call for your death." And now 3 times Jesus had to stand there and listen to the accusations. 3 times he's had to stand before people who called themselves godly people, who are saying things about him in hurtful ways and with the intention only to cause him pain. And yet he stands there and says nothing. And they bring him before Pilate. And Pilate's the Roman ruler at the time, and Pilate is the one who actually has the power to do these things. They bring this man who is standing silently to him early in the morning. I'm very sure that Pilate was probably perturbed that he had to get up so early in the morning to have to deal with these Jewish conflicts that are just meaningless. So he begins to ask Jesus questions. And he begins to ask the chief priests questions. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer for any of this stuff?" See how many things they are accusing you of? But Jesus still made no reply. And the ruler of the Roman area is amazed. How could anyone stand there and take it? Somebody who is not a man of God, somebody who has no relationship with God at all, looks at it and says, how could any human being take the false accusations and the things that are being said to him, the belittling, the things that are being mentioned, how could anybody stand there and take it? And we start to think to myself, and I think, how in the world could a Son of God love me so much that he would take it? How could he take the mistakes that I've made? How could he take the things that I've said, the things that I've done? How could somebody love me that much whenever I profess to love him and I still do the things that I do? How could the Savior just stand there and take it? Where's my retribution that I deserve? Where's my punishment that is due me for my wrongdoings? How can you just stand there and take it? Like a parent looking at a child who's made a mistake, standing there with tears in their eyes and saying nothing. The crushingness of it all that I feel. Why do I have a Savior that would take it? And Pilate looks at it and he says, this isn't a matter for me. I'm not dealing with this. He's not speaking. No, thank you. Send him to your king, Herod. So they send him to the king. Now he's already gone through 4 trials in essence, and still nobody can convict him. And he's still standing there silently. And he goes before Herod. And it says, on hearing this, Pilate asked it that the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because he had for a long time been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he'd hoped to see him perform a sign or some kind of miracle in essence, some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. And even now, Herod, the one who is supposedly the ruler over the Jews, is saying, show me something. I'm fascinated with you. I've heard great stories about you, Jesus. Show me something. Are what they're saying is true? Is it real? Can you do these things? Are you really this? Are you really able to do these things? And yet Jesus still stands there silently and says nothing. The chief priests and the teachers of the law are standing there vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressed him in an elegant robe. They sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this day, they had been enemies. And in the midst of Jesus' silence, now not only is he being accused of other things, but now the leader of the Jewish people and his soldiers and all those around him, now they're mocking him. Now they put on the robe and go, oh, Holy One. Oh, great Son of God. If you were so great, do something. And they begin to abuse him. And yet he was silent. And in the midst of this, 2 people who are just inherently against each other. Herod and the leadership can't stand the Romans because they control them. They tell them what they're able to do in their own faith and their own religion. And yet now all of a sudden in the midst of this, they've found allies to be together. Now they are friends. Now we become friends because we can mock abuse, and torture an innocent man. And he goes one more time. Now the morning's getting a little bit later, and he's facing his sixth trial. For the last time, he's asked again. And now, in the midst of all of this, even though Pilate can't find anything wrong with him, in the midst of all of it, he has to stand in front of his people. Some of the same people that were laying down palm branches and were crying out for him, Hosanna, King of Kings. Some of the same people that were in line to get a miracle from him before, that are all standing outside the area there, they start chanting, crucify him. Crucify him. And at any point he could have said, stop. At any point he could have spoke up, but he stood silent. When they brought in one of the worst people in the world, Barabbas, and stood him next to him, a killer, a horrible person, and they compared the two of them together, he could have said, I am not like him, but he sat silently. He stood there, outpouring his love for his people. They were chanting, crucify him. If we ever stop and we look at what is true outpouring of love, we can look in these 6 hours, an incredible man who loved us, who loved the very people that were putting him to death, who knew that at any point he could have spoken up and changed everything. But his silence was the biggest act of love that he could do. He stood silent. This is the God that we worship. This is the Son who brought us to God through his blood. This is the reason why we take communion. This is the reason why we sing praises to him, is because this Savior stood silent for you, and he stood silent for me. In a couple of weeks, the whole world is going to celebrate Easter, and there's going to be a lot of Easter eggs and bunny rabbits and a lot of other things, but we need to remember that that's not what this is about. We don't come here for candy and Easter eggs and fun little celebrations. We celebrate a Savior who stood silent for me and stood silent for you, who loved you so much that he could take it, who loved you so much that he knew if he took the beatings and the ridicules and the false accusations, that one day there would be a moment when you could be sitting here, that you could say, Lord, I love you so much that I can't stay silent anymore. I won't stay silent anymore. Your silence has given me a voice. Your silence has changed my life. Your silence has allowed me to speak. Because before I would have been at the jury spot, and I would have been guilty, and there would have been nothing I could have said about it. I would have been before the world saying, I plead no contest. I can't prove myself. I'm just guilty. But instead, because of your silence, I can speak up. Because of you, I can say, my life is different. Because of you, I can know the Father. Because of you, I am free. And that helps me to outpour my love on others. That's the Savior that we serve. That's the Savior that is calling you to be at one with him. This morning, as we conclude, I want you to think about where you are in your relationship with God. And remember that when we take this communion, when you sing those praises to Christ, when we sing about His excellent name and the wonderful things that He has done, that it was through His silence and His love for you that you can do that. And maybe for some of you all this morning, you are not at a place where you are at one with Him. Maybe you are to the point where you don't feel like you can speak out for God because you are burdened with sin, because you have things on your heart that have not been resolved. I want you to know that Jesus doesn't want you to stay in that place. He stood silent so you didn't have to. He's calling you this morning to let Him know what those burdens are, to give those to Him. He can take them. He's taken much worse. And He's more than willing to do it for you because He loves you. Maybe for some of you all, you are hearing this message for the very first time. And you had no idea that there could be somebody that could love you so much. He does. And He wants to love you even more. He wants you to have a relationship with His Father. And He knows that the only way that you can have a true relationship with God Himself is only through Him. And it's through His blood. And He allowed us to have that through baptism, through giving us the opportunity to give ourselves to God. To acknowledge that I am not worthy, I am guilty of all the things I've done wrong, Lord. And I can't do it on my own. But I acknowledge that your Son did it for me. And I am thankful. And God, I give all to you like He gave all for me. If we can help you out this morning with prayers, with studying to become a Christian, will you allow us to do that this morning as we stand and as we sing?